So, Brittany, thank you so much for coming today. I really enjoyed talking to you before. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about you, who you are, and kind of what you do?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me, Julio.
Yeah.
I coach entrepreneurs and I create leaders. And what does that look like? Well, I help business owners make more money, become strong leaders, and find fulfillment in the process.
Mm. How exactly? I mean, I know obviously there's many steps in order to do that, right? But if you had to give like a very condensed one sentence type of answer, how would you say you go about doing that?
Mm. Well, it really starts with examining where someone is at right now. I feel like
Mm.
there's so much content out there about goal setting
Right.
and creating a real big vision for yourself. But if you don't marry that with some deep reflection and looking at where you're at in this moment, then it's impossible to implement the proper strategy to eventually get you to your goals. So that's a key step that's really missing for people.
I think that's kind of interesting because it sort of reflects or mirrors the idea of what when you're creating an avatar for your business,
Mhm.
you need to both, and this is something I think all like you were just saying, it gets kind of lost in translation, is you need to both be aware of where they're at now, like their current starting point, which is how you can kind of learn their pain points and their processes and what they're thinking about and the kind of questions they're asking. And you need to also be able to figure out where they want to be, which gives them the idea of hope. So that way they want to buy your course or your templates or your swipe files or whatever, and save time and make money and all that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? So regardless of what offer you have, if it's a service or and even like an e-com type of shop,
Mhm.
you need to understand where they're at now, i.e. they are Googling for this t-shirt design or this, jewelry piece or whatever, and where they want to be. They want to have this necklace for the ball or the gala or this event or for their wedding, or you know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah.
that sort of thing of future planning, but also being aware of where they're at now and being able to figure out those questions, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. And so I come from more of the entrepreneur standpoint versus like the customer, the avatar standpoint,
Right.
like you were speaking about right there.
Yeah, cool. So whenever we were talking, a few weeks back, doing our little pre-chat and everything, we talked specifically about wanting to talk about the idea of creation versus consumption, because most of the people that are listening are creatives. They are starting their own business, and I think to start your own business in general, you have to be creative because it takes a lot of creative thinking to get that entrepreneurial mindset to figure out what you're doing and how you're going to do it and what the price points are and all that kind of stuff. But in this particular circumstance, since again, the people who are generally listening to this are creatives in terms of working in handmade industries and e-com, things of that nature. What are your thoughts when it comes to the idea of creation versus consumption? Like, what does that mean exactly?
Sure. So that's a key distinction that I love to work with all the time, creation versus consumption. And the issue right now is that there is so much great free content out there that it is easy to get lost in just consuming stuff that everybody else has created. So for instance, listening to this podcast right now, which
Right.
is awesome that they are, right? Because we're here to deliver a ton of value. But it is easy to just go on to the next thing and the next thing. And before you know it, you have spent hours consuming stuff that other people have made.
So basically, if I'm understanding what you're getting at is, you're consuming everything that people are giving out, but you're not actually doing anything with it because you're always looking for the next shiny object. You're always looking for the next secret, the next hack, the next thing that's going to grow your Instagram followers or make you $1 million or whatever the case is.
Right.
But you're
Right.
not actually starting the business, right?
Right. So we don't spend any time creating for ourselves or our business.
Right.
And one of the dangers in that overconsumption, well, number one, the biggest danger is the time suck, right? Like we all only have 24 hours in a day. No one has any time advantage. But if you're not being conscious about how you're spending it, then you are, at the danger of wasting it. But beyond that, if you are consuming way more content than creating, you might suffer from copycat syndrome, right? Where you have literally saturated your brain with all this content that when you sit down to create your own original stuff, you find you're just mimicking the other guys.
Right. Or you may I know for myself, if I do exactly that, and if I just go on like a, social media examiner binge or something, and I'm just like looking at all these different things about Facebook's new thing and Instagram's new thing, and I start thinking about, eventually I start thinking about, okay, well, now that I know that, I can start creating content. But then, yeah, like you just said, I'm kind of like in the back of my mind, I'm like, well, I'm kind of just rehashing what they said, so maybe I should wait. But the problem is waiting. I never get anywhere because I'm not consuming that content. I'm not. And then I also feel like, do I personally know this information, or am I just regurgitating other things? You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. You get to the point where you're like, hey, where did that idea come from? Wait a second.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's and almost like a form of writer's block, I'd say. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No. Well, I was just going to say that it's the easier thing to do. So my background is as a psychologist, and our brains naturally go towards the pleasure path. And so it is way easier to, like, first thing in the morning, open your phone and, look at what's happening on Instagram or, right, or whatever else, and feel connected and excited by those things. But our best, most creative energy happens in the morning. And so if we're giving away that really like coveted morning spot to just consuming other people's stuff, we have lost, because that could be our content out there that other people are consuming, or that could be our newest product or latest idea that we're sharing that is generating engagement. But it's not, because we're now the consumer.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I actually remember reading, I don't know, some article where they spoke about if you grab your phone first thing in the morning and like start to look at like news and all that kind of stuff, like because the news cycle tends to be very negative and like, everything is ending, the world's dying, whatever, every headline is something along those lines. You can actually set yourself up in like a negative headspace to where like the moment you wake up, you're already in a negative mood, and like the day just kind of feels less appealing, I suppose, which in turn could affect your creativity, right? Like you're not riding that high, you're automatically going into this, everything sucks, and the economy's trash. What's the point of me even having this business? Like you can kind of that slippery slope argument, right? Yeah.
Right.
So I just thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, everything has a line of diminishing returns, right? So there is value in social media. I mean, I'm on it. I have all kinds of different platforms that I'm on, but so I love connecting with people. I love creating stuff that generates engagement and engaging with followers and sharing ideas and having discussions about it. But I do have to I have really clear boundaries around it, because it's so easy to get sucked into it and to stay, where if I make creating my number one priority, then the first thing I'm doing on social media is posting. I'm adding value in some way before I'm consuming, because that way, first thing in the morning, I know I'm having my original idea. I'm not regurgitating someone else's.
Interesting. Actually, here's a question I'm just going to throw at you, and it might just come as a surprise. So feel free to tell me like, well, let's skip this. But when it comes to adding value, I think that's something that maybe for someone like you or I, in terms of like people who do marketing and whose product is more information based, is kind of a part of it is like we're selling ourselves in that sense. I think it's a little bit easier. Okay, so here's a real question. I find a lot of people that I help, because we work through e-commerce and things like that. Whenever I use the word value, I think that gets lost on people who sell, again, t-shirts and jewelry and things like that. Like they say, what do you mean by I have to provide value in the morning? Because to them, the only idea that they can do value is like oh, you want me to put a discount code in the morning? Like, do you want me to, like, I think they forget about the idea of engagement and they focus too much on the actual sales process of it. So the actual question I guess I'm asking you is, to those people who find it difficult to come up with anything but here's a discount code, when you say you need to be providing value to the universe, to social media, whatever it is, what kind of value can you see businesses that are e-com providing?
Sure. So I actually work with some e-com businesses, so I'm familiar with this problem and seeing it differently.
Sure.
If you have a business, that means you're doing something and you're earning money from it.
Right.
And if you're doing that, if you're able to earn money, then that means that you are solving some kind of problem for someone in the universe, right?
Sure.
So if that's happening, then that means there's, there was like a unique need for your product or your service. If we're talking e-commerce, let's just talk product for a second. And so since you're making money, that means you're solving this problem, which means you're adding value to someone's life in some way, right? Otherwise they wouldn't buy it. So I guess the way that I have people in product think about it is more along the lines of, think about the problem you're solving. Now, how do you personalize that? Think about the person and the problem, right?
Sure.
And so if you need to add more context to your product, then you need to talk about examples of how you have added value to people that have purchased this product, or the story behind the product, or the story behind employees at your organization, to really help humanize the whole process and connect, because people want to buy from people.
Right.
And the closer you can make that connection, the easier the sales process will be for you. So no matter what widget you're selling, they want to buy it from the person who's most relatable, whose story they get and they want to support. And so you can add value to your customer base. Remember, you're solving a problem, so you're adding value by adding maybe some more context around it to illustrate how you solve that problem and what you can solve it for them too.
No, it's a great way to say that, because I was actually saying something very similar to that, which was that social media as a whole is a lot of things are really great about it, right? And there's some negatives, of course, but part of the negative is that there's so much competition. Whereas in the 1950s or something, your competition was pretty much local. So you knew if you were selling shoes and the other guy had a 10% off shoe thing, your biggest problem was to say, should I do 10% or 12% off? You were always kind of just gouging your rival. Oh, maybe I'll give them free shipping, or I'll give them, buy one shoe, get the left free. I don't know, whatever. But now with so many competitors out there and so many ads and things that are going in front of people, I think in one way that's a negative. I can understand that. The idea of competition breeding excellence is obviously there, but I can understand why some people might think it's a negative. But I think the positive is that it makes you, when you can establish that brand, it makes fans that much more engaged with you and more likely to stay with you forever. Does that make sense? Totally. So it's a lot of more competitors, but when people do like you, they're in.
Right. So I'll give an example for all the parents out there. Do you own any Melissa and Doug toys?
I don't know what that is.
It's a brand of toys that is much more uses a lot of sustainable product. They make their stuff out of wood instead of bright plastics.
Okay.
But they're a lot of places. You can find it in Target. And I'm willing to pay more for a pretend grocery store basket thing from them versus for example, the Fisher-Price product, because their values align more with mine. I like their story. They're trying to make their stuff in the USA as much as possible. They try to use sustainable materials, and I like this wholesome image that they're selling, right? So it's not just fake apple to fake apple. It is much more than that, because they provide that context to us through into their marketing, which is important.
Yeah, 100%. And even for my child, like there's a kid, I don't remember his name exactly, but I think his name's like Ryan. I don't know last names or anything like that. He was some YouTube's kid, like he, 4 years old and making millions of dollars a year or something like, So, but the fact that my son had seen him do some toy reveal thing, like a year and a half ago, like when we go to like Target or Walmart or whatever, like, yeah, he looks at all the toys, but he's more inclined to wanting to check out Ryan's toys because that kid, his dad or whatever, started making toys and stuff and putting them in Target and stuff. So that's why he's, super wealthy, I'd imagine. But my son is more inclined to, because he sees a face and he sees a familiar kid that he was like, oh, wow. So now this kid has toys. So it's just kind of adding to that idea of like establishing that brand identity, and people are going to recognize it and follow it and are more inclined to buy from you versus, Hasbro or Nabisco or, whatever random other company there is producing maybe a similar thing.
Yeah. But here's where I think people get stuck. It is scary to put yourself out there. Yeah. And I think people so if we're talking about creatives and people who make, like you said, handmade stuff, people go into business because they're an expert at something. They don't necessarily go into it because they're thinking about all the stuff that's behind the scenes that has to happen. Like no one sat down and was like, I absolutely love doing financial audits. Like I'm going to start this business over here, like making, I don't know, printed cards because I love to do the back end of business. But it's part of it. And so the, creating a process around the content creation side of things can really make this all easier. Right. Because what you're battling with here is your fear. And fear is like really, really strong. It's really good at stopping us from doing things. And our brain does that on purpose. It tries to keep us safe all the time. And so it keeps us in that comfort zone. So think about all the things you maybe know you should be doing for your business. You've considered, you've heard someone else say it, whatever, but you don't do it. That's what's stopping you, is that fear, right? So in order to put yourself out there more, which we know is going to help build that brand and build that story and that customer loyalty that you talked about, we've got to get into the habit of creation. So when we sit and open up our phone in the morning, instead of creating the content we know we should be, it's because we're shying away from it. There is a fear there. And we don't want to dive in. It feels uncomfortable. But the more often you do it, the less uncomfortable it will feel. And you will create that habit. You will get into, a systematic approach that will really serve you in the end.
Yeah, it's same thing with sports, right? It's all about reps. You whether it's working out at the gym or soccer or football or whatever, is like you have to. The first time you do it, you're gonna suck. Yeah, it is. It's a guarantee, right? Like, but the more you do it, the better you get. The more, your body starts to understand things and learn things. And this is similar. It's more mental because it's it's in front of I still have trouble with that. Like if I'm I find it very difficult to act silly in front of a camera because I actually visualize myself as like a third person, like a godlike character looking down on myself, and I'm looking at myself in an empty room with a piece of plastic staring at me that has a little light telling me it's on, and me suddenly being like, whoa. And it just seems so stupid. And like, why would I do that? I'm going to make an ass out of myself but the reality is that it's not meant for me. It's meant to entertain and educate and all that, hundreds or thousands or millions of people. But it's weird because I'm not physically in front of people. It's a little piece of plastic that I'm pretending is a bunch of people. I don't know. It's difficult for me to get into the mindset of like, this is okay. I can act weird by myself in this room and like I'm not weird. But kind of go ahead.
Well, that's just going to have a whole new meaning now because we are in month like 5 of quarantine.
Oof. Yeah, something like that.
And so 6. So this is, I hate when people are all saying this new normal or whatever, but things are changing. Like it might have felt weirder even a year ago to do that, but we are going to be spending more and more time in situations that you just described, in a room by ourselves, staring at some piece of technology that's going to transmit our image and our voice across to other people to access it. And what people are going to be missing more and more is that human connection, which involves you being totally you, right? Like your authenticity with all your quirks, you know, and letting that be seen. And the thing is like the more challenging it is to create that content, the more people are going to love it, because you're moving more and more into that place of like, this is who I totally am, like unbridled. And people are going to love it because they can appreciate that silliness because they have it in them too. But they see like how much courage it takes to actually create that and put that out there. And so really, the truer story you can tell just about who you are is going to yield more and more results for you and your business.
That actually brings up a decent question. And so quality versus quantity. As you were mentioning that, I was thinking like you were talking about, you know, the effort, right? The effort you're putting into it can in some ways dictate outcome, right? So like if you just do maybe a 3-second little quote post or something and post it and just like didn't put any real thought or message or anything behind it, it might garner some views and they might garner some likes. But if you did something that maybe a video or something where you spent 10 minutes actually explaining a process of how you create this piece or whatever, I think in the long run, that one single individual post, if you put them side by side, may not necessarily outperform, especially if your audience isn't used to you producing that sort of content. But I think over the long haul, it would. So if you look at places like Social Media Examiner and things like that, they have to look at, part of their job is they're like a news outlet, right? As is pretty much anything that says social media management, marketing, whatever. So part of it is they have to take all these numbers and data figures and tell you like, you need to join TikTok because there's 17 million people joining, you know, every month or logging in every month or whatever, right? And so as a business person, in your mind, you go, oh, wow, 17 million. But I think context is lost in a lot of those things. Like it might be 17 million people, but they might be all, you know, 80% of them are under the age of 12. And of those, they're all producing dance videos or something. They're not producing marketing content. Like I think we forget, or not even forget, I just don't think we're being told, well, I guess it's not even their job to tell us. So I guess it is forget. We forget that when we read these headlines and see these little snippets of articles and things like that, or hear these things on podcasts, that it's not necessarily reflective of our business. You know, like it's talking about businesses in general, and businesses they can be meme pages, like where they just post a bunch of random crap. And eventually, because they get 100,000 followers, they start to try to monetize that by putting, you know, some sort of, buy this ginseng supplement or something, you know, like whatever the case is. It's that's how they monetize it. And when you look at Social Media Examiner or whatever, they take all of that into consideration as well. So they're not just talking about your small Etsy shop where you create handmade scarves, you know what I mean? But I think we tend to think of that and say, oh, okay, so I need to create 11 posts a day because according to this random thing, 11 posts had so much more content and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, that's easy and doable for a meme page that they're just taking pictures of The Rock or something and making some funny caption. It's not so easy or doable if you're trying to create quality content for your small business that is actually going to convert looky-loos into actual followers and followers into buyers. Do you agree with that? That was a super long thing for me to say.
And then I'm just going to say yes or no. I like this podcast. So yes, completely agree with you that you have to pay attention to quality first and foremost, and that's true with your product too. We can talk about marketing and like back end business stuff like all day long, but if the thing you're selling is crap, then it's not going to work. So number one,
Right.
quality is always the rule. But I like to follow the rule of consistency. So it might be that this type of business says 11 posts, that's not going to work for you. But if you dig deeper and you find that for your type of business with your price point or whatever, even then you get the exact number, that's great for those metrics and that information. But you still have to do what works for you, because there might be other people you're competing against that have a small team, that have like a marketing person, or even just someone that they're able to like hire a freelance person to do that. If you are a solopreneur and you're trying to compete with that, that's impossible. But the best thing you could do at that point is pick one or two platforms, and this includes email too, that works for you, that is manageable for you, and pick a frequency that is manageable for you. And if you can only post a little bit, the best thing you could do is just say every Tuesday morning I'm posting.
Yeah.
That's it. Like that you'd be much better off doing that than being haphazardly, like 1 week you post every day and then you're absent for 3 weeks, like you've got to create that familiarity and that habit with your followers to say, oh, I know I'm going to hear from her now.
Right. As a matter of fact, and not to disagree, because I do agree, but I would even argue that is really more about establishing a habit with amongst yourself, because yes, it's important for the followers too, but I can't speak for everybody, but I know for myself, like I'm not necessarily ever opening up Instagram being like, I know that, blank person posts at 3 p.m. every Wednesday. Like it's not a television program that I really give a crap about. Like I follow that person, but I'm not like, my life doesn't revolve around that person. But I think it is incredibly important for that person to establish that habit, so that way they can consistently put out content and put out things that they feel confident about, that they like, that they enjoy. And that's why I normally say that you should be creating not less content, because I think you can create a bunch of like little things like quotes and things like that, which you can batch out and it's not really that big of a deal. But if you're creating like, have you ever heard of the term like pillar content? Like they use that term for like blogs and stuff, I think you should be creating pillar content for like Instagram and all those places by actually systematically breaking down what you're trying to tell people and say, okay, I'm going to do it this way, and I'm going to draw, and I'm going to create this slideshow, and I'm going to do it live, and then I'm going to repost it, and then I'm going to do this and that and break it down. And you know what I mean? Instead of just like, I'm just going to put whatever random thought comes into my head, and hopefully that somehow gets me a bunch of followers and a bunch of money.
Right. And just to clarify for the audience, the pillars you're referring to are like the pillars of your business. And so maybe the top 3 or 5 things that that kind of make up your brand.
Right.
And so I know for me, like I spend I have 5 pillars, and I talk about leadership, and I talk about business systems, but I also share about my family and being a mom, because I think it's a unique thing to be a working mom right now. And I know that resonates with a lot of people in my community, because they're also parents. And I want to kind of provide some of that behind the scenes type stuff of, hey, this might like look like I've got this nice finished product, but here's the craziness that went into it, to just to make it a bit more personable.
Yeah, totally agree. So I think, as we've been talking about this, I think one of the key things I've been hearing from you anyways is that you've got to, as you mentioned with in regards to creating content consistently and understanding what you're doing and waking up in the morning and creating and all that. I think a big overarching theme is to kind of be truthful with yourself about the sort of time that you're spending and how you're spending it. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that and I don't know if it's because of, the comparison game that having access to so many people kind of creates. It's so easy to compare ourselves to what other people are doing, but being really honest with yourself about how you are spending your time. So there's a lot of lost little moments that can really distract us and take us away. And that's okay. I mean, we're human. We all need breaks, but the best thing we can do for ourselves is kind of create a schedule and stick to it. Just like you said, we were talking about training the followers in a sense to like come to expect us in certain times. We have to do that also for ourselves. Our brains work most effectively when we work in a schedule and habit that can be easily detected. So our brains are programmed for pattern recognition. And the more we perform within that pattern, then the less time we have to spend thinking about what to do next, and we just do. And that's why you see so many entrepreneurs talking about time chunking. They like do certain things on Tuesdays, other things like on Wednesdays and Thursdays. And it's kind of like seems ridiculous. But the reason they do that is you don't have to then spend time thinking and planning. You can put all your energy into creating and executing. And especially as solopreneurs, that should be like the main focus, because the energy is so limited to that one person, you know? So it's extra important that we are so conscious about how we're spending that time.
So when it comes to creating the time and the actual content in that time frame, I think when we were speaking a while back during our little like pre-chat, we kind of spoke a little bit about a term called like priming sequence when it comes to actually creating original ideas. Do you want to tell the audience like what that means and how they can go about doing that?
Sure. So I am a huge believer in creating a routine that sets you up for success. And I am the first person to admit that I do not nail this every day. I've got a lot of variables I'm dealing with, like most of you. So I just want to throw that out there this is a goal, and this is something that we are always like trying to achieve. It starts with sleep. So the truth is that to have an excellent morning, it starts with the prior evening. And what I like to do is I have like my phone set to all kinds of reminders about putting my phone away an hour before bed or any kind of screen, and making sure I get 8 hours of sleep. Now, that's good for me. You might be great with 7 or 6 or whatever your situation is. A lot of people talk about getting up at 5 a.m. You know, that might not work for you. And it doesn't always work for me too. My husband has a very different schedule than I do, so I can't do that every day of the week. But some things I want to offer you guys as ideas are trying to wake up at the same time every day, whether that's 4, 5, or 6 or whatever it is. You can push yourself to create that half an hour extra in the morning than you're waking up now. And that literally just 30 minutes, there's a tremendous amount that you could create in that when you've done this correctly. When you wake up first, instead of reaching for your phone, I'm going to challenge you to spend maybe 5 minutes to just focus on some deep breathing, like even with your eyes closed, even if you still lay in bed. A lot of people enjoy doing this sitting up. I say I do like 50-50, depends on the day. Maybe the weather, it gets pretty cold over here. So 5 extra minutes in bed is nice sometimes. But just conscious breathing of like feeling my body, feeling like myself waking up, and feeling that kind of shift that happens in our hormones as we start to wake up in the day. And from there, I usually have already laid out a plan of what I'm going to do in that hour that I have to myself in the morning that I've created. Again, some other ideas. Some people love to wake up and do yoga or work out first thing in the morning. That doesn't so much work for me. I like to do that midday. But if you take that first second to yourself, that's the key thing. Do something for you first, whether that is that 5 minutes of meditation, 30 minutes of exercise, something that is slow moving, that is not your phone, that can help you become more focused and clear about your next steps for that day.
Okay. I like that. That's a unique take on something that I've kind of heard before in reference to like waking up. And the one thing I was told a long time ago, and I try to do that, I just like you, I fail some days, is to wake up and basically to wake up and out loud talk about like what you're grateful for. just by waking up, right? It's like kind of like counting your blessings or however you want to say it. But as someone like myself who doesn't necessarily have like a faith system per se, so like what I do is instead of saying like count my blessings or saying like pray in the morning and all that, I do a sort of gratitude checklist of sorts. Like I just wake up and I say, okay, from a general, fundamental human being standpoint, what am I grateful for? And I'm grateful for my son. I'm grateful for my wife. I'm grateful to have a, roof over my head. And I try to change it up a little bit, or I try to delve a little deeper into how I'm feeling or whatever. And especially if I'm maybe the day before, I don't know, maybe I argued with my wife or something. And so that morning in particular, I may spend a little extra time trying to remind myself that life is good and I need to wake up and be in a positive mood and not, hold on to whatever I was annoyed about the other day, or, you know what I mean? So kind of the same idea. And I think that's incredibly important generally, even with people, or especially with people who have children, because having kids is hard. Like some days it's like, it's always amazing, but like some days it's particularly great and you're just like, oh my God, this is fantastic. Yeah. And other days you're just like, just sit down and shut up. And I mean that as nicely as possible, but it's just like it can be overwhelming especially as with the COVID and all that, and kids are at home all the time, and you don't get that break. And if you're trying to also work from home and all that stuff, you're just like, oh, I got so many things to do and I have to cook and clean and this and that. And so, it can, but waking up with gratitude. And as you were mentioning, waking up with and not touching your phone, and instead spending a few minutes breathing and maybe stretching out a little bit and just doing some things that kind of get the blood flowing, I think is very important, especially as we get older, instead of waking up with, your muscles aching and your bones creaking and you're just like, life sucks, So.
Yeah. Well, there's some serious research behind gratitude and having a regular gratitude practice, and how it changes your mindset and how it changes the place that you come from that day. And when you are able to come from a place of really abundance, is what gratitude creates. It creates this mindset of like, I have enough, I have what I need, and I'm here to serve, and whether you're creating an e-commerce product or you do an actual physical service, like you are adding value to someone else, like we talked about earlier. And when you can put yourself in that mindset, it makes it much easier to create. It makes it much easier to kind of put yourself out there because there's a purpose behind it. And what you are going to create that day is going to have so much more value because of the intentionality that you lead with. So I couldn't agree more about the gratitude practice.
I think it can be difficult for business owners to be grateful some days when it comes to putting out your creativity into social media and things like that in particular, because there's some days where it all goes great and you get a bunch of comments and everything's going great and you're like, oh, I'm grateful for my fans and followers and all that, and then other days maybe you were like, oh, I think this post is going to do really well, and maybe for some reason it just doesn't resonate, or it only gets a couple, like 2 or 3 likes or something, and you're just like, what the hell? And it's hard to sit there and say like, that's okay, and this is still an amazing time, and I still put out value, and because I think we all have that not fear of failure necessarily, which I think we all do to some extent anyways, but I just mean like, I think it particularly hurts because it feels like a failure when you're not getting a bunch of love and comments and engagement back, so I kind of want to see if you have any thoughts on that, on being familiar with failure and trying to, allow yourself to fail forward, if you will.
Yes, I absolutely love this concept. I am a huge believer that there is no overnight success, right? There's like there's the 10-year hustler. Like there is no, there's no easy path to getting to that successful place. You have to work through several iterations. And what an iteration is a product that didn't do well, right? Like something failed and you created a newer and better version. This happens in every kind of business. Like I don't care what industry you're in. If you are not constantly iterating, then your product is not improving, and the needs are constantly changing. So it's a necessity to keep doing that. So there's like 10 different ways I talk about this all day long. We all have that fear of failure. You are totally right about that. The important thing to remember is you need to just go ahead anyway. And it's so easy for me to sit here and say, because I've done it and I failed and I've survived. I lived. And I say that to my clients all the time. Like, oh, I did this thing and I sent this proposal out. And I'm like, yeah, but did you die? You know, and they like, oh, sure. But I mean it seriously, because inside, like, that anxiety about sending that email and pushing, send is all about, you can drive it all the way back in your amygdala to the fear of dying. And so that fear response was built in our brains to keep us alive, right? When there were like tigers jumping out at us, but that's not the situation anymore. And so we have to kind of untrain our brain to fire in that way, because it stops us. It stops us from putting something out there that might be our next huge win, because we're so afraid of it failing and not having that acceptance from people around us.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, I was just about to say, like, I think even adding a few, maybe centuries into the development of our brain and going past the idea of like just being scared of the tigers. I think it's that being fearful of the tribe, looking at you and disregarding you and kicking you out and making you, be by yourself and get pillaged or starved or whatever, you know what I mean? Like kicking you out of the actual tribe. So yeah, I think that's sort of it too, right? It's why you have a lot of people have such a fear of public speaking and stuff. And it's not just the fear of, oh, well, I slip up. It's the fear of, what if everyone hates me? And then you snowball, right? Like, if this room hates me, then that's 100 people, or this live or this podcast or whatever.
Yeah.
That's 100 people that are now going to say that I don't know what I'm talking about. Now, of those 100 people, what if one of them was going to be like a really good client of mine, and then now I don't have a business, and then from there I go bankrupt, and then from there I never work again, because what if like, there's so many, like, it's a snowball effect of like a bunch of what ifs and circumstantial thought processes, and we're just but it is all fear and it is all anxiety that is just kind of up, saying like there's a reason for it, and there's it's understandable, but you shouldn't allow yourself to be controlled by it.
Mm-hmm. Right. So I call that catastrophizing. And we all have that ability to go there and like just jump in that rabbit hole and go down it. Yeah. But again, huge time suck. We've talked a lot about how you spend your time today. Wrong mindset. You're not going to create, if you're like overwhelmed by fear, you're not going to create anything awesome anyway. Right. And you are not any step closer to that iteration of whatever it is you're trying out. So courageous action is the first step to anything. So clients ask me all the time, like, oh, I need clarity on this or that or whatever. The answer is always to just take a step in some direction, because from there you have a better vantage point.
Sure.
From here, you're totally encased in the fog and you don't know, and you're paralyzed by it. Right. But if you take one step in any direction, it will become clear where you need to go from there.
Yeah, it's a sort of scientific process where you need to actually test out the hypothesis in order to move forward and understand whether or not you can continue on, or if you should say, okay, this was wrong and I need to do something else. And I think we all get fearful of that, and we like you said, we get frozen because we're like, we have two options in front of us. I can either sell to this group or this group, or I can use these brand colors or this brand color. And you don't want to be wrong, because again, you start to catastrophize that, and you start to say, if I rebrand again, everyone's going to think I'm an idiot. No one's going to trust my business. This is all going to go, I'm going to go bankrupt. When the reality is that, you're not the center of everyone's universe. Like most people, it might take a little bit a few weeks or a month or something for people to get familiar with your brand again and your colors and stuff. But it's not like the world's worst thing where you're done. You're never gonna make it ever. You know what I mean?
Totally. I completely agree. And I think you're so right on about not being the center of everyone else's universe. I mean, think how much time we spend thinking about the things we do. Like, oh, how was that received? Oh, should I do this? Oh, should I position it this way or whatever? Everyone else is having those same thoughts, but about themselves. So there's no time for them to be completely focused on you. And what I find so interesting is often when I put something out, whether it is a new coaching program, I don't want everyone to think I'm just talking about social media here the whole time. Whether it's a new product, a new program, a new course, a new item for sale, whatever, I find that I get so much feedback from people like, wow, you're doing awesome. Like, look at how much you're doing. And I think, oh gosh, this is like half-assed, or, oh, I should have put like a little bit more into that or whatever. Like, I don't know, because we're too close to our own work. And so it's so nice to actually put something out and get that kind of feedback, because people are going to see it so differently than you. You're so critical of your stuff because you are so close to it. It provides such a different perspective. And so for that reason alone, just putting stuff out before you feel ready is so important, because you're going to hear that kind of feedback from people. You guys can engage with me on LinkedIn, Instagram. I have an email list that I actively send out every Tuesday. You could get tons of free value there. And I have an ebook that I just recently put out. You can find it on my website, www.brittnydrozd.com. And there you will see the link to download. It is 5 Secrets to Growth and Profitability. It is a really, really simple step-by-step process that is going to help you look at where you're at and just grow from there. So please check it out.
Yeah, I actually already looked at it myself, and it's a super valuable PDF file. Please, everyone, check it out, look through it. As far as like Instagram and Facebook and all that, what's your handle, your tag, so that way people can follow you?
So my handle for Instagram is @BrittDrozd, BrittDrozd. And you can look me up by my full name, Brittany Drozd, on LinkedIn. And that's the same thing for my website too.
Cool. Easy enough. So everyone please go and follow her, check out the ebook, talk to Brittany. She did an amazing job here on the podcast, and we hope to have her on again. Well, everyone, thank you so much again for listening to us, and we will talk to you later. Bye.